Welcome back to Dan on Dev. Today we are going to continue our Why All Application Security Products Sucks series with Why All WAFs or Web Application Firewalls Suck. Today we're going to be looking at what they do, what they don't do, going through the details as we've been doing with each of them. The goal here is not to necessarily beat up on the different product categories necessarily. We're doing is looking at each of these products that are tools. These are tools that do a job, and each tool is going to be good at something and not so good at other things. That is just life. If I were to ask somebody to build a house with a single product, with a single tool, they would likely fail, right? There are some things that it's going to do well at. So what you want to do is understand your tools, understand the strengths, the weaknesses, because the more that you understand them, the more you will be able to pick the right tool for the job. You'll be able to look at what this tool does and what it doesn't do, and also look at your own dev environments, how your teams are building product, and how does this tool fit into your environment and your needs, your goals. If it doesn't fit your goals, it's not going to be the right product. And then once you kind of get into like, okay, what category of products, then you'll want to dive deep into the individual products. And usually within each category, there's several tools out there. You want to find out which one is suitable to your environment as well, right? So there's granularity that you have to kind of go through. So this is an overview of the categories themselves, not necessarily the individual products. May do that down the line, but that's not what this series is about. So picking the right tool for the job. There's this alphabet soup of solutions here. We've already covered the testing tools. The static analysis tool we covered. The static analysis tool is looking at the actual source code. We've talked about the DAST, which is looking at the running application from the outside, kind of like an attacker does. We've talked about the RASP, which the runtime application security protection, which is looking at the running application from the inside, kind of like an X-ray, was the example there. We looked at the SCA product, which is looking at kind of the inventory of code that is used to help build the application, right? The stuff that the third-party stuff that you bring in, which is pretty common these days. So we've covered all of those. Now we're going to shift over to defensive. And largely in the defensive space, we have, besides defending it in the code itself, which is really where a lot of the defense should happen. But after that, you're going to have the web application firewall and then the RASP, or next gen web application firewall. The RASP is a real-time application security protection. And that's going to be the next episode, so we'll be talking about that. Today, we're going to be focused on the WAF, the web application firewall. So we always start off with the 101, a web application firewall in contrast to a traditional firewall. A traditional firewall is looking at all of the traffic that's coming in. So it's like from this person or this IP address to this host, it's trying to go there. Is it allowed to even just go? Is it allowed to hit that host at that port? And it's at the network layer, it's at the TCP, UDP port layer generally. It's looking at that traffic and saying, is this allowed to even make it in? I guess there's ICMP, but whatever. So is it allowed to get there? If there's a web server on the other end, usually port 80 and 443 would be allowed, and it allows it through, and the traditional firewall's job is done. The web application firewall, in contrast, so this is like this little chart here. That top line is the traditional firewall. Is this allowed to even go to that host? Yes or no, and then it either lets it or not. The next line you'll see is the web application firewall. The next two lines are really going to be the web application firewall. And what they're looking at is they're actually inspecting the HTTP traffic, right? So if it's going over port 80 or 443, it's generally going to be HTTP formatted traffic. And it's going to parse that traffic, look at it, and try to detect, is there malicious activity in here? And if there is, block it. If they don't see anything illegitimate, then it'll let it through. Okay? And so that's kind of the model of a WAF. It's looking at that layer. Okay? That sounds cool in practice. it's, to me, a mall cop. It's going to look like it's got a badge and everything, but it generally has very little action that it can actually do. I'm not a huge fan of WAFs, so we're going to jump really, over to why WAFs suck. The problem with a WAF in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, they actually could do stuff because they're sitting at the HTTP layer, and they could parse the traffic. Back then, all the traffic was the get and post formatted model was these name equal value pairs that were pretty straightforward. You could look at each of them really quickly, do some regexes or whatever you want to do, look at them, see if there's attack payloads in there, and decide to either block it or allow it. HTTP data has evolved past that. There are now these complex formats that are in use. You've got from XML to JSON to Google Web Toolkit, whatever. People are putting large amounts of data into those spaces now. The ability for a WAF to parse all of that, parse the nested layers of it, and look at each layer and try to find payloads in there, I don't see it. What generally happens, if the payload is too large, a lot of these WAFs will fail open, meaning they don't want to slow down the traffic too much because then people are going to turn them off if they're making the site slow. So they just kind of let it through. If it takes too long to analyze, let it through. That fail open model makes it too easy, I think, for WAF bypasses. There's all kinds of WAF evasion techniques within there. It's looking at the traffic is so difficult at the speed that it has to do it. I just haven't seen it in practice. It's really just, I used to believe in them. I used to recommend them all the time, but now it's just a PCI compliance checkbox as far as I'm concerned. There are loads of problems. It is difficult to train them, to configure them. They have too many false positives, because they're thinking there's an attack, so they're going to block things. That's a problem. So, that'll get them off and unplugged or disabled. I see a lot of WAFs in alert only mode because of this because they don't want to block good traffic. So I just don't see a lot there. There's a problem to me with with the usage of WAFs. They'll cover some very basic stuff, so they will block you from some script kiddie attacks and those sort of things. They can be configured to identify some of those, but they're just not sitting in the right place as far as I'm concerned. They have to be closer. If you do it a RASP model where it's like when you put a WAF right in front of it and they're kind of working together, maybe you can get some cool stuff. But I just see some weaknesses. So anyway, that's why they suck. Why they rock? Well, I don't have much to say there. So, I guess that's where we'll wrap this one up. This one will be a little shorter, a little sweeter on that. So maybe, if you're a WAF vendor or, if you've been building a WAF and you've got some disagreements, maybe you've solved some problems that I mentioned, I'd love to hear about it. But that is our episode on why web application firewalls suck. And thank you for joining me through this series. Comment, subscribe, appreciate it, and look forward to chatting with you in the next episode.